I am very happy to welcome Elizabeth and Kenya here, who are going to lead us in this conversation about neurodiversity and the gifts that those children bring into our atrium and catechus, I guess, as well. Thank you for offering to do this. Elizabeth first mentioned it to me many months ago, and we work a few months ahead, and so I was really glad we finally got this going. Kenya and Elizabeth have shared work before. They've shared churches before, I believe. So I would really love it if you would introduce yourselves or each other. Maybe that would be the best. Then you know the right things to say.
We do know some of the right things to say. Elizabeth has not only, we've shared faith-based, church-based, but Elizabeth has also taught my bonus babies, children that I love and adore, but did not bore. And so I'm grateful for our multifaceted relationship. And so we're going to share a little bit more about ourselves in our actual presentation. I'm grateful to talk to folks tonight, not as a guest in your community, but as someone neurodivergent themselves, and someone who loves that you all exist in the world, the catechus, and their commitment, and hearing even folks say, I had to stay until the school year was over.
Yeah.
To walk with these children who've been through so much in the changing world that we're living in. So before we jump into like a formal presentation and introductions, I'd like to pray, if that's all right.
Oh, yes.
Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this day, for these, your catechists, for these supporters, those folks that are working with young people, with children, God, with those who are neurotypical and neurodivergent and neuroexpansive, and that we are all figuring out what those things mean and how to honor you in the ways that we care for, learn with these your people. God, be with us tonight, reminding us that we can't fit everything that we'd want to know or talk about into one evening, but that this is a catalyst moment that we might learn and journey together tonight and have fodder for the work that we do weekly. It's in your son's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So guys, you're working with two neurodivergent people today, which means we can get squirreled really fast and really easy. So if you all think we're really rambling, do the raised hand, do the interruption. We're also don't care if you do the interruption because we're neurodivergent. So here we go. So we actually have a title for our atrium called the Inclusive Atrium. Because it really helps us remember things. So I went ahead and put that on there as a thing. Let's see. I actually think I'm going to reduce that. Is that better for everyone to see with the taglines of people attached? I'm honored to do a land acknowledgement space. I'm in North Charleston, and Kenya lives in Aiken, South Carolina, which is on the Georgia border. And so the indigenous folk in this area were the Coosaw and the Westos. And both of those do not exist in their intact form anymore. They were either absorbed or died during colonization. And I also want to mention the people groups that were enslaved and brought over into North America. And in my area, they turned swamp into where my house can actually sit on dry ground today. So the Mamindu and the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Bakongo, the Fon, and the Mindi were the primary ethnic groups that are in the southeast of the United States. Now for introductions.
Yeah, so I dropped the link in the chat. That's an incredible link to learn more about the native land that you live on. So just incredible reference. But my name is Kenya, and there are a lot of important identity points that I felt like were important to share. One being I'm Black, I'm Southern, I love Jesus. I am formally theologically trained, so I have a master's of divinity, but I am what folks would call either living in what situational poverty or working poor, even with that educational credential. I'm married to an incredible human being, and I am a caretaker of several kids. So my husband has 2 lovely little humans, and we have I kind of pick children up as I go. So I have a couple God kids from various different relationships and spaces in my life where families have trusted me to walk with them. I'm also chronically ill, so live with several disabilities. But I like to consider myself not just neurodivergent, but neural expansive, which is a term that Black folks coined when thinking about the ways in which their brains worked. And so my formal diagnosis are things like our ADHD, CPTSD, and my biggest joy is to walk theologically with people. And so I get to do that by being like theologians in residence in spaces and doing like Christian political education. And so I like to tell folks that I'm a theologian of the overlooked. So I often am bringing those voices and those into the center in my work.
And I'm a white passing, although I have a bit of blood from the Cherokee Nation. I am neurodiverse. I'm autistic. I do also love Jesus a whole lot, and conversations tend to come back to Jesus no matter where we start. I am Southern. I'm highly educated. I have multiple master's degrees in Montessori education, and I'm an anthropological theologian. I'm married to an amazing human being, Daniel, who is, when I travel, my human resource person and who helps me navigate the world. I'm a mom of 2. Both of them are also neurodivergent. And I live in an economically stable life. So I can share and support the world around me in ways that God's preferential treatment for the poor would call me to do. I'm a theologian with children. For those of you who don't know my world at this moment, before I was with the Methodists, now I'm with the Presbyterians/Lutherans. So I am welcome anybody out there to give me any information you want to about catechesis in those spaces. And I work as a theological and educational consultant as well, because we all know church does not pay great.
Can I just break in here and ask a question? My video is showing Black.
Is everybody's video showing Black?
Yeah.
Oh, fun, because we actually have slides. Hold on, let's see. I'm going to stop share. And let's try again. Does that work better?
Yeah.
No. Well, I have
It's as if you've got some boxes open in front of the.
Oh, that is wild, because I do not.
Wow.
Okay, we're going to try one more time. Let's give it a go.
When you move your mouse around.
Share screen. Jody Beth, you are saying things and I can't hear you, but I'm really sure they're super important.
It seems to happen when you're moving your mouse around.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
So do we have screen now? We may just have to live our lives.
Well, it looks pretty good right now. Just one small little rectangle.
Okay. We may have to do this one more time because I have my notes and I will just print my notes out, which is fine.
Okay.
But let me know if it goes away again.
And I'm asking it for everyone else to know that I am recording this so that it's available to people who can't make it tonight. So.
Okay. Does everybody still see a screen?
It keeps jumping, Elizabeth. when you're sharing it, are you sharing it right from the keynote, or are you like sharing your full screen?
I'm sharing from the presentation and keynote, which I've done before, but who knows? Not since the upgrade on, I don't know. Let's see what happens, guys. Go
Yeah.
for it. I won't move my mouse anymore.
Okay, well, looks good now. Thank you.
All right. All right. Um, we're jumping back into like when Elizabeth and I share space, we really love to create a container. So just reminding folks that there will be things potentially that you hear that will push you against things that you have been taught, or things that like that you socially learned. But this is an invitation into brave space. And so we're asking folks to be brave and to serve the work and take good care and to cultivate belonging, not just in this space as we spend time together tonight, but also like in your atriums, that we're going to create some beauty together, and that there's going to be excellence in all the things. Excellence doesn't mean perfection, but it does mean like this striving forth. Can you tell that I'm deeply influenced by Wesley? Am I sharing right there? And then what's really important in this is to know that like that also might mean that as we're asking questions, we might be using poor language choices. So we might pause to talk about that. That's not a singling out. That's like a gift to us all, so that we make better choices in the future. And then Elizabeth, will you talk a little bit about like the note around just using the language of neurodiverse in general, and how that can be triggering for folks?
So there's a lot of discussion around terminology that gets used with neurodiverse people, especially how do we prefer to be called and identified as being neurodiverse? And that is a fluid thing. So it's usually great if you ask neurodiverse people, how do you, when you are going to define them, how do you want to be defined? I tend to use that I am autistic. I am an autistic person. The other choice that can get made is I am a person with autism, or I am a person with ADHD, or a person with dyslexia. So those are somewhat interchangeable, but they matter in certain spaces and to certain people. Except now I can't move forward. Why? There we go. So let's talk about us. Let's talk about Catechus. Let's talk about Atrium. So the characteristics of an Atrium are that we are creative, we are charismatic, and we are communal. And as a catechist, what do we value the absolute most? We value being hospitable, welcoming, inclusive to all the children that come to us. We share the gospel in the multitude of facets that it comes to us in a canonic way, and we are nurturing of those relationships. And this is a little video that I wanted to show of an autistic child.
Look at that.
You're doing a great job.
Next time I have to cut things, you're going to be my guy. I'm bringing it to your house.
Which piece you want to start?
Don't judge. I'm sharing my body with my friend.
Nate is a remarkable man who's well over 6 feet and probably 260, 270, and he scrunched himself up on a very cold concrete floor to let this child learn how to cut. He had never been allowed to use scissors before, not by us, but we didn't realize that by his family. And he worked so hard and had so much joy in that moment. And Nate reflected that joy back and celebrated the gift of being able to manage one's own space and relationship with sharp objects. And it was probably one of the most spectacular moments that I've had as a catechist. And I get really cool answers from kids all the time and all those sorts of things. But watching a person connect completely with a child who does not find connection easy was the most beautiful and brilliant moment in the kingdom of God for me.
So neurodiversity, we know that this is a term that like has been coined actually by some actual folks experiencing neurodiversity. So pointing to a larger reality that not everyone experiences the same neurological functions or capabilities. And it's something that's important to understand, like it's naturally occurring. Like folks have always existed on various different planes of like understanding in the ways mechanics of their brain and their social from the beginning of time. So it's understand like this is a natural occurring reality in information processing. It's also important to understand that this is not no way better than some disabilities or worse. I think that's like something that we are socialized to believe that certain realities around neurodiversity, and don't worry, we're going to better flesh that out by giving examples of what those things look like. Like some of those are better. So like sometimes we think about some folks with autism as like being savants, like they are the genius and the photographic memory, and they're the person you want on your team. And we see that in popular media, even television shows today. We also see the ways that we, with even in the same space, like with autism, like it's, people will characterize like a child beating their head at a table, or and make lots of sweeping judgments about the fullness of who a child or an adult is in one captured moment. Also, people often think about the violence or the lack of intelligence. And those are all things that we all have to unpack and sit with. It's important to note that even when it comes to like neurodiversity, we see that our students who are not receiving services in school and often are pushed out of school also have like are existing in this plane of neurodiversity in a particular space where folks criminalize or demonize the ways in which they process information. And it's really important for catechists in your community building and in your work with children to also be acknowledging and checking your own understandings or what comes up for you when you hear certain words.
And we are deliberately centering the voices of neurodivergent people in this conversation. You may be aware of organizations and publications, but we are making very deliberate choices to listen to those voices right now. Oh, it's doing it again. Hold on, guys, it's gonna bump. There we go. Let's talk about some examples of when we say neurodivergent. This is not a complete list. Let's go over some of the less familiar terms. Generally in our culture, we recognize the term ADD, ADHD. We recognize autism. We'll get more into those terms a little bit more specifically, but let's look at dyspraxia. That's a really common disorder that is centered around movement and coordination. And when that gets coupled with some of the other neurodiverse range of skills, that can lead to a person not being able to communicate in a way that we would expect for a person to communicate. Dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and dyslexia all involve either bringing in information into your brain to be able to process it. So how you view words in dyslexics, how you view letters, how you perceive lines, where dyscalculia and dysgraphia have a lot more to do with how you export information out of your brain and into a written page. Sometimes they overlap, a lot of times they go together. There it is. I do want to show you a video of another one of our students that a mom sent me. This is Penny. And Penny's mom, you'll need some descriptors here. This is for echolalia. This is Penny's mom's words. I am looking through my videos, and this one is short, but you can notice our interaction that she repeats me saying, got it. And then she wants me to ask her again, so she says, got it, back. When I did ask, she said, it's sticking. You can hear that little hesitation in making of original language, not just repeating back what I said. Then at the end, she says, I'll use a hint. That is a Gestalt script, and she is using to ask for help. So Penny actually is an amazing kid. We'll talk a little bit more about her, but she speaks by watching movies, and when she has found something that communicates what she is feeling, her brain Rolodexes through the movies that she's seen, and she repeats those things. Or if she's read something in a book or heard it explained to her in a TV show, she will rote answer back, and her best form of communication is that way. And she's now 5. When she was younger, that was her only form of communication. So let's see if I can get this. Yep.
Doesn't work.
You gotta squeeze it kind of hard. Got it?
Got it. Got it?
Got it? Did it stick?
It's sticking.
Oh, here, let me help you.
Let me help. I need help.
Okay, now try. Wah. You want me to try?
I'll use a hint.
Use a hint.
Use a hint.
So that is an example of a child using echolalia to communicate, which you can also notice if you're her mom, that's really easy. But if you were her school teacher, you might not have all the context that you would need. Hyperlexia, which is also, Penny has hyperlexia, which is an advanced and unexpected ability to read way beyond a child's chronological age. Penny began reading at 2, and she can read any word. That, like, by 3, she could read anything. That did not mean she comprehended what she was reading, but she could actually read those words. Mears Island syndrome, it's a visual stress where fine motor tasks such as reading that the eye has to do is really challenged. And as a child is fatigued, it is much harder for them to mask that and can present itself in ways that are stressful inside an atrium. OCD is one of those things that is debated. This is a free-floating list of neurodiversity. I've put OCD in here. It is a thing where your brain is requiring certain behaviors in a certain way to move on to the next thing. Synesthesia, it's a neurological condition in which information meant to stimulate one part of your brain is perceived by another part of your brain or another sense. For example, letters and numbers are perceived in hues of color. So when you are learning a letter, you're not learning a shape as much as you are learning a hue of color. And then Tourette syndrome, a disorder that involves repetition of movement and unwanted sounds, tics that cannot be easily controlled, repeated blinking of the eyes, shrugging of shoulders, tilt of a head, and sometimes it's odd sounds that get blurted out or offensive words. There's more of these than are listed here. There are ones that are debated whether they should be listed here. This tends to be the most common ones that you're going to find inside a space when you're educating children. I've put up a slide here that kind of can indicate for you some of the challenges for 3 common overlapping learning challenges. Each neurodiverse diagnosis has different areas of life that it will be affecting. And those are for like dysgraphia, organization, fine motor skills, concentration, classroom management. So all those things we'll talk about like how to view a child who may have much more stress with organization, but be better at concentration. These are not by any means complete. There are some other ways to look at this which might be better, but this is just kind of to show you this is a complex thing. And if you don't understand it, it's okay. These are like really smart people who do this all day long, and they're constantly changing these charts. So just ask lots of questions to really smart people who do this all day long, and kind of work through things and communicate and think through things as you're going. So yeah, the good times of neurodiversity now.
Good times. So what is important to note is that when speaking about neurodiversity, there has been like this is how most of us are speaking now, or a great larger majority of folks are speaking now, and versus like this is how we used to speak. And even these changes have been in a short period of time. So I'm in my mid-30s and went to college and learned identity first language as a ed major. So when we're thinking about identity first, just what it is, like, what is the identity point? So Elizabeth and I were very serious about sharing points of our identity like early on, so you can be reminded of those things and think this identity part. So for me, like a Black Southern person, like I'm gonna put the emphasis on parts of my identity first, and that is complicated when thinking about when who was schooled in what train of thought. So like even when having conversations with parents, you might want to center a student's identity. And Elizabeth told us early to like first think about what the person who's neurodiverse wants, but also like what has been their introduction into this reality. So many of us are still learning about even functioning language and titles and diagnosis and all of that stuff. So you want to be really mindful. So I'm just going to walk through what some of these words are, and like note that even the language is kind of split where things are grouped in one space, another grouped in another. So thinking about accommodation is language that we use now. That's how we create access for students. We think about assistance, and we think about things being a spectrum. And that's not just with autism, which folks often hear about ASD, that being a spectrum, just space, but that's also with all other forms of neurodiversity. That's why Elizabeth shared those graphics around like this function and how does that connect? Is it a closer thing? Is it a bigger thing? So it's important for us to be thinking about spectrums, and that's language that you'll hear and see in more recent articles. However, certain language still exists. Low functioning, teach them to be normal, Asperger's. These are all things you hear a lot. That's why we have this graphic up here, like gaslighting autistics can look like, because there's a school of thought that's really permanent. Like that's like we see ableism taking its full shape and form in like the most smallest exchanges. So just for clarity, low functioning is not language that folks are using in current academic space. We think a lot about like, what are the students' support needs? We think a lot about, we're not speaking, like normal is not a reality. So what does it mean to like teach a student to ask for the accommodations that they need if they're able to, but also to celebrate like the Imago Dei in them, like as they're manifest in this current space. And then Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis point. And so it's really important for folks to understand that that's also a strong tension point, and that ableism is pervasive. So even those, like even Elizabeth and I hold ableist thoughts and ideas. We often, because we're in community, can check one another and say like, I think you're like holding yourself to a standard that's not real for who you are and your embodiment. And so those are just some like points that I want us to pay attention to, because that language is changing. But it's important to note, especially with the identity first language, that there are still lots of people that put the person first, and that we are not here to correct or like to finger point at people. These are decisions that folks come to and families come to for themselves. It's a matter of like, can we listen? Can we support? And can we maintain the child's dignity? Now, if you hear families doing things that feel like breaking a young person's dignity, there are ways to pray and support and for you to model things, but that doesn't mean scolding folks for not having the same language sets that you do.
So let's talk about how we perceive neurodiversity. We've kind of gone with autism as a default here because it is kind of a way that we're realizing as a culture that there are more neurodivergent people out there, and many of them fall in the spectrum of autism. The wheel on the right is common words that we might use as educators when we look at a child. If we are making notes in our catechist observation notebook, we might say some of these things. And I've put them in, these areas overlap. So if you were putting this in a color wheel, you would kind of blend some of these together, because some behaviors also involve communication. And so these, I can tell you from my own personal experience, how challenging it can be to hear some of these things, and what it's like when you do not have the ability to change to meet the expectation of this cherished adult that is guiding you. And as we live in a community with children, people want to fit into that space. When we perceive our neurodiversity and don't kind of look behind, we're going to keep unpacking this. I'm trying to find a way to say this that is good words. It's painful, folks. This is painful. I cannot tell you how many times this has been painful in my world. Too blunt, doesn't seem to listen, can't organize, can't retell the story, can't follow multi-step directions, does better if I write down the instructions. And it's not said in a way of like, ooh, I've sorted it. If I write it down, the kid will get it. It's said in the way of like, well, they ought to be able to get it, but I have to write it down. It's putting me out. The dramatic, the impulsive, the explosive, all these things are behaviors that may or may not be reactive behaviors from a stressed child, and not a tantrum. That's going to be a topic. We'll get to some of that in a second. But each person is unique in how these things are expressed. And so when you find yourself writing, hyperactive down, start peeling back behind that and watching more carefully. When someone can't stop talking, peel back and look and see kind of what's going on behind that. My favorite one was a parent that came to me and said, my child will just run to anyone. He has absolutely no common sense. That's because he couldn't recognize faces. And just if you were the right height and kind of generally the right build, the child would go, because they did not have the ability to discriminate facial features well. So let's talk about perceiving neurodiversity for half a second. This is actually my autism spectrum for you to see. The further outward the color reaches is how functional I am by myself without any accommodations. The closer to the little dot in the middle, that is when I need help. And folks that are in training with me know that my husband travels with me when I come to take my level 2 and level 3 trainings, because when I'm in an educational space where there's a lot of thinking and processing and social work that I have to do, I have a really hard time with actually taking care of my physical needs. I forget all the time I have to go to the bathroom until I stand up. I forget to eat. I just don't recognize those parts of what typicals would find a normal thing in their life. I can't read emojis. That gets really fun when people text all the time. I have no idea what those emojis mean. I do know what some of them mean because people have told me, and I've been able to be in conversation with friends and say, hey, I just got this emoji. What does it mean? And after several times, I can learn that that is what is being nuanced, hopefully, in that. My last Montessori teaching job, my head of school told me that I was an acquired taste, which, me being neurodiverse, I was proud of that. But then I realized later that was actually not a compliment. I don't know how to work with you, is sometimes placed on my table. Why did you take that literally? Well, because you said it that way. I don't have another way to take it. My son, who has autism, my oldest child, I asked him to sweep the floor lightly once, which he did. He took the broom, he held it so the bristles just barely touched the floor, and he swept the floor lightly. That is part of the way I view the world too. I'm sure I can't find he's easier to pick on for an example and has given me permission to tell stories about him tonight. So as we perceive people that are neurodiverse, please recognize that those people, you may be surprised in certain areas and you're like, are you really autistic? Well, I mask really good because I didn't get diagnosed until I was pretty old, like well into being an adult. And I've learned to fake it till I make it kind of look a lot of times. But then in other areas, it is glaringly obvious that I need help. And I, for a long time, didn't get that help I needed. So there's kind of my story of how the world perceives my neurodiversity.
Ooh, Elizabeth, I was not prepared. Not prepared, like I'm following. The thing about hearing how one person's story is it opens up pieces of your own story, or even maybe as you are hearing certain realities in forms of expression, you might also be like, oh, I'm thinking of a particular student, thinking of myself, I'm thinking of my child. So I apologize for that audible, like, oh, I was not prepared.
I want to add one small thing in that I wanted to kind of throw in there is how theologically we look at things. And when Jesus healed people, Jesus healed their body, but Jesus also gave them back their social dignity. And in having a name and a diagnosis for me, that gave me back my dignity, that I just felt like I wasn't trying hard enough. I wasn't working hard enough. I wasn't all these things. And in a society where we don't need Jesus to literally heal our bodies to survive in our culture anymore, but we still desperately need Jesus's ability to name us and who we are and our identities so that we can be socially healed and become who we are in the kingdom of God. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder, Elizabeth. Ooh, about social dignity. I want to double check. I've seen one person chime in the chat, just making sure that folks are still with us. Like I said, Elizabeth and I could do these kind of conversations without a Zoom webinar. And so I just want to know and double check that folks, I'm seeing some smiling faces and some multitasking. I know about the reality of being home, but just wanted to check back in real time to make sure you're tracking. So.
So support, we all need it. Therapies are in existence to help children and families, the neurodivergent, reach their goals. And as support people, we shouldn't be aiming to cure someone or make them appear more normal or less autistic. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is really a lovely place to start if you are looking into what does this mean. Do you really want to be known by your worst moments of your day? And for a lot of kids that are in school, this little report that's on the screen is what goes home at the end of the day that tells their parent whether or not they are valid and good people. And it's, did you stay seated? Did you stay on task? And did you follow directions? And I'm pretty sure the last time I pulled up Facebook in the middle of something else I was supposed to be doing, I wasn't on task and I probably wasn't following directions, although I probably was seated. So as adults, we don't want to be held to things like this, and just limiting a child's success to something like this can be really, really challenging for a child. There are lots of things that are great to help neurodiverse kids. Speech therapy. Penny is in speech therapy. Occupational therapy. There are a lot of things that come together to make a child successful and to help a child become who God has created them to become and to be able to unveil their gifts to the world. And occupational and physical therapy can be life-giving. Play therapy is really great. Strength-based assessments. I'm always really glad to have a child's diagnosis papers when I'm teaching a kid, like in Montessori world, because that allows me to name what that child is amazing at and be able to be honest about what that child will need to ask other people for assistance on. And being able to do that, having those strength-based assessments lets that child have value and worth. So we won't necessarily be looking at a child's testing scores inside of an Atrium situation, but we can use our eyes and observe what their strengths are. They may want to run up to the person who walks to the door. Well, guess what? We can teach them to be a greeter. We can acknowledge the hospitality in that child and elevate it and say, your job in the Atrium, because you are gifted this way by God, is to greet people. Let's learn how to greet. And finding ways for them to be that greeter. If it is running, grabbing a sign and taking it with them to the door that says, hi, welcome to the Atrium, that is the same as teaching them to shake hands, make good eye contact, and say, welcome to the Atrium. You are finding that gift and you are finding a way for that gift to be expressed. Perspective taking. That is stepping back when you see the child having a moment, as we say in the South, beginning that first moment when they are starting to find a point of frustration and taking perspective and intervening and helping them recognize those moments as they get older, being able to self-recognize perspective. And stepping away from whatever is upsetting them. And we'll talk about ways to manage meltdowns in a second. Sensory integration without tolerance, which basically means kids need to be able to try to pull together the threads and be able to read and be able to work through all the little pieces of their life as best as they can. But we also have to recognize that at some point, the stress and the pain of doing that may mean that we need to let that wait a while. We may have agendas, and we are going to set aside some of our agendas for the sake of the child. And allowing them, knowing that God talks to them already, and trusting that God is having that space with them in those moments. behavior and neurodiversity, it's really easy. I just kind of want to harp on this for a slight second. It's really easy to want compliance. That is really not what we as catechists are here for. We are here for comprehension. We're here to give them nomenclature and entrances into the life of the church and the church community. And that requires them to comprehend things, not to just do something correctly. Not to just be able to sit in their chair without moving for extended periods of time. If I have a student right now, we're working to bring him back into a public school setting, and we're hunting for a public school that will allow his need to actually think this child needs to walk. And he just needs to be able to pace at the back of the room. And you'd be surprised at how many teachers really are having a challenge with that accommodation. How do we consistently respond to that child? That leads to deep self-loathing and depression if we are centering our needs, not the child's needs. And I'm going to say this is a balancing act, right? Because we are in a community and we have to live as a community. So we can't have someone who is running through the room, destroying, interrupting, and hurting other people's materials. And I'm there with you on that. But I'm also there with you on that if we only center that we just need that child to be still for 5 minutes, that's not going to solve our problem. So when we focus on compliance over self-advocacy, that's going to be a problem. When we center the adult's priorities rather than what the student needs, we will do the things that Montessori really preaches against. We will decrease intrinsic motivation. We will decrease creativity. And those are really amazing gifts that we as catechists want to raise in children. That's why we ask I wonder questions, right? We want them to creatively engage with God. We want them to choose what their communication style with God is. So they have an intrinsic motivation to have this relationship with God. So our supports that we have are really challenging for us to be creative around those things and to work with community to be creative around those things. I have a student in our atrium that when we are in person needs a one-on-one attendant. And that is perfectly fine. And you can draw a boundary with a parent and say, I need a person, let's sit down and let's meet and see who an aid for this child can best be. Sometimes it's really, honestly, it has been older gentlemen in my congregation are like the best. Penny has an older gentleman who actually fell down and broke his knee, and we were devastated because Penny had bonded with this guy, and he was amazing with Penny. He understood her, he worked to understand her, and he had the time and the energy to put into being a one-on-one person with Penny. And we have children that just need a quiet corner and ear defenders, which we'll talk about momentarily, to be able to be successful. And that is all they need, was some level of ability to not have so much noise coming at them, and then they were fine. So it's kind of, this is a spectrum. So you have to figure out where your children are on the spectrum to see what you need to do. So Atrium's a whole community, and the game we're playing is how to help with regulation and communication. So the way to help with regulation, low distraction areas, which means it's kind of the quiet corner. And you're not sending a child there as you are bad, go sit in the naughty chair. It's I'm recognizing that you are showing me you're distressed. You're worried about something, you're upset. Why don't you go sit over here for a little while and find peace? That might be at the prayer table for you. Or it may be a corner that you set up. I usually give two options. Would you like to go to the prayer table? And kids will lay down. Sometimes they'll be under the prayer table They may fall asleep. Sometimes they'll go to the low distraction area, which has a weighted blanket and headphones, noise canceling headphones, and then they're great. That's where they need it to be. Neurodiverse kids of all stripes really do well with a printed schedule. It doesn't have to be managed exactly for most neurodiverse kids, but they just need to know what will come next. If you have prayer at the beginning, if you meet at the prayer table at the beginning, that goes on the schedule at the beginning. If you do it at the end, it goes at the end. You just you can work with your oldest set of kids to, what does our atrium usually have? What happens in our atrium? Let's make a list. Visual cues for communication. We're going to talk about cueing in a second. Ear defenders. They're like $8 on Amazon. They are amazing things. I had no idea how amazing they were. Autistic people and a lot of ADHD people have really hard times with filtering the sounds from all around them. And it's not that they just hear the easy to hear sounds. They can hear the buzzing of the fluorescent light bulbs. They can hear the ice cream truck 6 blocks away that you didn't know. I know kids who can hear the buzzing of electricity going through the wires when there are no fluorescent light bulbs. So you hear all that and you're taking that in all the time. It's like being in a loud concert for the whole day. And so ear defenders just help muffle that down a little bit. It doesn't make it so that the kid can't hear. It just means that the child is not hearing as much. And it makes it much easier to handle the stresses of being around all the other stresses. Sensory retreats. I think that's a great name. It's kind of like fancy for, I put up a pump tit in the corner and I put a blanket in there, and it is a place where the kid can go and be alone. And it's a way that the kid can define, I need to not be talked to right now. And it's helpful for students. It's kind of like a low distraction area on steroids. You have the kid that needs complete still and quiet. You also are going to have the option of having the kid that needs movement. They are hyperkinesthetic. They need gross motor options. The catechesis doesn't do great gross motor options. So say the addition of a mini trampoline or a sit and spin in a space outside the main area, yes, it will be distracting for a little while. Then the kids will forget it ever existed, and only the kids who need it will go back. I promise. It will drive you crazy, but I promise it works. But those little mini tramps for 3 and 4-year-old kids who have hyperkinesthetic needs, that is going to be helpful. Try desperately to get rid of the fluorescent light bulbs. Just try. You can now get LED lights that fit in the fluorescent tracks. Uncluttered, simple palette. Look, we already do that, right? We are not posting a million things on the wall. We are not anthropomorphizing everything. So we have it all. Montessori's approach to this is really, really good. The catechesis' approach to how we talk to kids and how we interact with kids is really honoring to the child and therefore honoring to children with special needs. I added a sheepskin rug. I know that there are some people who are allergic to wool. I have yet to have a child in my classroom with that, but my kids who need to calm down, a sheepskin rug has been fabulous. The small tent with a pillow is the sensory retreat space option. This is also have a conversation with the parents. How are they helping kids with all the things that they're doing? And how are they helping their child communicate? So we've now looked at regulation helps. Oh, I'm sorry, clay. Let's talk about clay for a split second. Instead of drawing, moldable clay that's easily cleaned up. When you get done, instead of saying, why don't you go reinterpret the images that you see in the tracing packet? Or why don't you think through and, elementary age, retell the story as a comic book? Give them clay and allow them to create for themselves their own characters. They're still processing, they're still working in many of the same mental ways that you would if you were drawing, but that is not the end all be all. Communication. This is near and dear to me. If I saw this sign, when I left the room, I would have turned the light off because you told me to. You all understand this in a very different way. You know that means when the last person leaves the room, please turn off the light. That is not what that means to me. You gave me a direct order. I can follow. There are lots of different ways that we process. We process auditorily. Churches are really actually great spaces. Liturgical churches especially are great spaces for neurodiverse people to live. They make us feel comfortable. A couple of reasons. The service is the same. I show up. I know there's going to be a procession, except for that one time out of the year there's not, but they let me know that because they have a visual processing aid for me. I get a little piece of paper when I come into church that tells me what comes next. That makes me feel safe and secure. I might, if I haven't tried this yet, this is totally spitballing, but it's been a thing in my head. I have a couple of kids who are neurodivergent, and in level 3, if you've had your training, there is the control map and work that has to do with parts of the service. I might actually introduce that control map with those tiles earlier to a neurodivergent child in level 2, just because it will help them organize the service in their mind, the whole service, not just the Eucharist part of the service. Auditory communication is how churches communicate the most. Preachers preach sermons. That is the one thing that I cannot necessarily get a visual help with me. But everything else, the liturgy is read to the people, but it's also printed. I can follow along. Other kids can know what's going on. I think it's a genius part of having kids give the option of making their own missal, their own little lectionary piece, because when the kids have that, then they are truly in control of what page they're on. They're not at the mercy of figuring out, page 324 of the Book of Common Prayer, starting at the second paragraph. They're not doing that. They've written it out. Visual communication. We spend a lot of time in the atrium with visual communication. It's a beautiful thing. We tell kids it is penitence. We are in a season of preparation. It is purple. We know where we are. We ground. The church has for centuries worked with people who needed visual processing aids. We have stained glass windows. We have symbolic things like the font and the chalice. All those things that help us have communication with God are really great in liturgical spaces with these kids and adults and everybody else to help recognize and interpret what is happening in a service. They are nonverbal communication. They cue us to what we need to be thinking about. I highly recommend having large print Bibles in your atrium, not as the only thing, but at least on the prayer table, or at least in spaces where kids might need to be reading. If you have dyslexic children, the larger print is going to be more helpful. And the smaller the print, it's already kind of hard to find your place in the Bible anyway. But the larger the print, the easier it is. Not every kid needs that. Some kids like the smaller Bibles. They think it's really fun to hold. That's great, but have an option for kids. Place a child who is having challenges with reading next to you so they can follow along as you're reading. Run your finger across the page as you're reading, and that is reinforcing the way that we read from left to right or right to left, depending on where you are in the world, from top to bottom. And that's helping their eyes get used to those sorts of things, and that this is the pattern of how we read. That we ask older children to assist younger children, beautiful, genius, right? We're not calling out the fact that the kid is not reading on grade level or where we think they should be reading. They are reading exactly where they are right now for themselves, and we are providing a way for them to not be embarrassed that they can't read as well as other children by allowing them to do other things, like place the items on the mat while this other child moves and sits and reads with them. There's kinesthetic communication. The person who's a really kinesthetic learner needs to move while they are learning. So that is, they are learning through demonstration. We already do that. We have dioramas. We read from the Bible. We provide them in elementary with the option of also joining us in the reading process. And then we move figures. We take care of that. Then we invite the children to come and move figures on their own. Would you like to continue with this work? Yes, great. Come find me when you've completed it and I'll help you make it ready for the next person. So you are providing the cueing to say, yes, I want to be a kinesthetic learner. I want to move this myself, and I want to think about Jesus as I do that myself. It is repetitious. Kinesthetic learners often need repetition, and that is really great. It provides the stimulation. Kinesthetic learners, when you have circle time, need something to do often with their hands. These are the kids that your brain went, oh, I just wish he'd sit still. And crisscross applesauce does not work with them very well. So years ago, some wise teacher told me you need to have finger chaining, and which some people know as finger knitting. Because once a child knows how to do it, they just do it, and it does not enter their frontal part of their brain that is actually processing what you're saying, but it is occupying the part of their brain that needs action, that needs movement. So I'm not a huge fan of fidget spinners because they actually require that you look down at them every time you want to spin them. I do not have anybody that has thoughts on the Poppy, the new thing with the little Poppy buttons. I know that a lot of parents are in love with them. I've not seen them used inside a classroom as something to hold attention, but often that's kind of distracting for other kids. The finger chaining just becomes part of what is the environment. And any kid has that option. And guess what? They will make their own La Fatusha, and you will have, 2 miles of finger chaining by the end. Parents also are great for bringing in yarn. They love it. Grandmothers love to bring yarn. CGS is the best model for having children draw near to God and being formed in relationship. We all wouldn't be here if we didn't believe that. And neurodiverse children learn best in spaces where they can move at their own pace, where they have individualized attention, where they can engage from multiple angles with material and information. And CGS provides that. So already know that you're there for neurodivergent families. Lots of communication with parents is super important. I had someone once look at me and say, I don't want to know about any child who comes in my room. I just want to take them when they come in my room. And there's merit to just having a cold read on a child. Neurodivergent children, it might be really good to have a conversation with the parent and let the parent know that you are there with them in this walking through process of helping the child discover who they are in the kingdom of God, and that you are right there. I'm not great at remembering things. So I had a really cool neurodivergent friend once tell me to set an alarm on my phone. And my phone lets me know on the 3rd Friday of every month to text my neurodivergent parents and just check in with them. Oh, the parents don't really, they're like, thanks for checking in, we're doing great. Or time's kind of rough right now. And I text back, I'm praying for you. Is there anything I can do to help you? But that parent who is incredibly overwhelmed and incredibly heavy at times, we're living and walking with a neurodivergent child can be really stressful for the adults. And you just being like, hey, I'm here. I may not be able to solve anything, but I'm with you, is huge. It is incredibly releasing for these parents. The cueing, last major topic is cueing. This is where things get sticky, because what works for an ADHD child may not work for an autistic child. What works for one ADD child may not work for another ADHD child. So one thing that tends to work really well for all the kids is color coding things. I used to poo-poo a particular branch of Montessori education that had different colored trays for different sections of work. So language had a color, practical life had a color, and I was always like, all right, that's just get wood. You're good. What do you need this for? And then I realized that it helps kids know that that particular work goes back on that shelf because they may not be able to recall that information. Do I do it with everything? No, I do not have that kind of budget. But I try to think about color coding a little bit more and more as I'm moving through things. Having a visible clock, especially for your elementary kids, helps ground kids to know where they are in time. De-escalation signs and code words. Parents have to help you with this. Parents are working with their kid. I had a code word for my younger child, peanut, when they started cycling into an OCD behavior. And so when they would start really getting deeply into rearranging something, I would say peanut. And that was a way of kind of shocking the brain a little bit. And then Aya could decide, what is my next step? Sometimes we need de-escalation signs for some kids to be able to recognize when I feel anxiety, these are my options to do. There is an image at the bottom of the screen called My Cummings Strategies, which I would not use this one for my classroom. This one is one actually one of my parents uses. That's fabulous. It's not free. But I would create one for calming strategies that a child could use inside a space that when they're beginning to feel overwhelmed, their brain kind of, I don't want to say short circuits, but it doesn't go into a space where rational, logical thought is going to be elevated. It's going to go into a space of fight and flight. And so if you can give a visual cue that says, okay, here's 5 possible things I could do right now. I just need to choose one of them. I would have fewer for younger children. You can get a little more complex as you get older. Task initiation cards. It's really hard for neurodiverse people to initiate work. Montessori would teach us that we want child to be self-motivated. Well, a child can be self-motivated, but we might need to give them some choices to be self-motivated. We are not dictating to the child, but they know that over there on the wall, here are extension possibilities, because they just can't pull that to the space and bring it out. Or what they're going to do is just follow along with someone else. And they really didn't want to do that, but it was the choice they could make. And then they might be a little disruptive because it isn't the work that they are actually called to do, but they couldn't find the choice. Emotional temperature check cards. I want to give you a warning about these. They're actually wonderful. You do not know how long I had to search to find this particular example for one of these. Almost all of them use emojis. What did I tell you about emojis and autistic people? We don't read emojis well. So I might not be able to tell the difference between anxious and frustrated if I am supposed to be going by how I feel off of that emoji. So this one at least kind of gave me, it gave me colors. Might help me, right? But I would need you to define for me that green means I'm calm and red means I'm upset. A lot of these also do not use anxious, frustrated, and overwhelmed in between. They use other words. I can't remember what they are right now, but I really would say don't use those. You would prefer that the child recognize that they are getting anxious rather than, I can't remember what they are. But anyway, those are better words than some of them. So kind of pay attention, think like a child when you're having those thoughts. Sign language works really well. We have a symbol for I need to go to the bathroom, because sometimes when you start recognizing that you have a bodily function, the immediacy of that bodily function is pretty huge. And I need you to know that I need to use the restroom and I may not be able to find my words to do that well. I should also be able to say no and sorry and other things when it becomes difficult for me to speak. List of extensions and response ideas is that whole idea of providing ways that a child could respond to work in a way that they can visually see it so they can choose. And also, please, for the love of all, give a 5-minute warning before you ask a child to stop what they're doing and move on. Any kid at all. So there we go. So coming close together. Ultimately, we're an unworthy servant, right? We say that as catechists. That's part of what we know. And we are a co-learner with the child. So when a family shows up to you, God put them there. And they come with all their pains, their joys, their style of parenting. I had a parent on their intake form write feral as their version of how they parent. They're a gift from God to me, and my job as a catechist is to love them and find out how best to have those conversations with the child and the family. We're called by God to observe, to then educate ourselves, to ask questions, and seek how we can be hospitable so we can grow. And upon our growth, then we can offer ways for the family and the child to come close to God together. And that was a lot, y'all. I apologize. We sort of timed it out, and I thought we were going to be give about 30 minutes for questions and answers, not 10, but I apologize. I'm going to stop share, so now I can actually see chat. I'm sorry.
I got them queued up for you, Elizabeth, so we'll
Okay.
kind of run
Okay, let's
quickly.
go. And then I couldn't see you, so I didn't know if you were still here or not.
Oh,
So
I was here. I apologize. I got just transparency. My family is in the process of figuring out diagnosis for a child, and so Elizabeth was running down symptoms, and I was like, "And that's my kid," and then had a moment later and been like, "And that's Kenya," and so. I just started transitioning into trying to hold questions as quickly as I can. And Elizabeth hosts the Inclusive Atrium. So I think what we can't offer immediately, we can also possibly like do some resource digging in the back end. So first, Rebecca had a question. Rebecca, where did your question go? If you can unmute, you can share it. If not, I'm going to share Samantha's question because it's sitting right here in front of me.
Strength-based assessment tools for young kids. Is that the one? Rebecca?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, repeat.
Recommend strength-based assessment tools for young kids.
Those are really best. There are a couple of like online ones I can put up links on the Inclusive Atrium. However, I really, if as a country we could get our brains in our heads and every single child be educationally assessed, that would be the best thing we could do for our educational system. And I really am a huge advocate for the sake of your child's self-worth, having them professionally looked at and assessed through professional work. It's just, I'm a huge advocate for that. Just there. I will make a note and I'll make a blog post on that for you guys.
Great. Next up, Samantha was asking about the individual works and practical life activities that require ability to transition, which can create anxiety for some neurodivergent children, at least in level 1. Any suggestions? Maybe we should be using cueing?
A lot of that works well if your level 1 child can partner. I know most practical life work is not done through partnership activity. But certain ones, especially like table scrubbing, the ones that are large multi-step work or require extensive replenishment of the material, once they're done with that work, those can be overwhelming. So allowing that child to have assistance from someone else that is in the atrium that might actually need to have that reinforced because now they're 5.5 and they're getting really cocky. And they need to remember too to put the work away. saying, I noticed this about what's going on here. Seems really hard for her. Could you step in when she gets done with that work and assist her to complete that? And that gives the scaffolding. The fancy word in educational life is scaffolding. It gives the scaffolding to help that child be successful and actually provides space for that other child to also feel successful.
All right. And then next up can we get an example of extension activities for some of the key presentations? For example, for the initiation cards?
I tend to hang with elementary, so bear with me. I have a set of kind of and a small bulletin board, like one of those small, like ones for a locker. I have 5 things that I stick up on there to help cue kids. Go to the prayer table, make a prayer card, retell the story, and then I have like comic book, poetry. What was the other one? I have song. And so that gives them like 3 possible ways that way. And then I have a way that they can take that story towards take a story towards the community. When we're looking at when we're primarily like memorial parables are hot and heavy, we are looking at how can we create a response that is taking how we feel about the moral choices that we're making and taking that into the world. And usually that comes based off of the discussions that we've been having. I can't give you like a list of those because those change because kids think of new ways. And we kind of talk about them and hash them out. And that, creating a poster is sometimes the way the kids often, because elementary age wants to do stuff together. So they'll make a poster about a saint or that was showing us these sorts of things like that. Level 1, I would say things like, go to prayer table. I might put the picture of the prayer table. Sing a song. I might put some music, an image with music on it. Things like that are very, very basic. Put a picture of the tracing work for them or the gluing work, something like that. So then they just kind of are, and when you're offering the work at the end, you just lay down the cards and you're like, there it is. In elementary, I leave it over there. If the kid needs it, I might redirect them to go look at that. If you need something, go look over on the wall. It might help you, which gives them much more agency. The others, I'm just kind of almost laying them down like I'm laying out Uno cards and saying, what do you think you're going to pick right now? I think I need to talk to God for a while. Something like that gives them, I'm not directing them. I'm also part of the picking. Okay, sorry. Go, Kenya. I digress.
One is maybe CGS could develop products for neurodiverse children, which I think is less than like a question that you could answer, but like, putting it out into this incredible community.
This has been a real struggle. I'm switching. I was hired by a different church, and I have a group of children who are neurodivergent who has met with me all the way through. We sort of fell into Zoom Atrium. But these children meet with me every single Sunday, and by God, every single Sunday. Do not, I'll be like, I'm traveling and I'm out of town this weekend, and they're like, can we still meet? And a parent will meet with them, and that allows those kids who get overwhelmed by too many people and too much stuff, they're elementary age, to have a space where they can think and they can comment. And they come up with some of the craziest things. Some of my best conversations I've ever had. Kenya's laughing because Kenya's child. Yeah, Kenya's child the other day, we were deep into like the parable of, in our world, it's known as the mugged man and the Samaritan, the mugged man, because they thought that we should center the victim. And so we're deep into that, and Kenya's child pops up and goes, are aliens real? And all the kids they're all neurodiverse. They just pivot. And we are now looking at, are aliens real? Well, they decided that aliens probably are real and that Jesus loves them just as much as anybody else. And there we went back to the parable of the mugged man. So for us neurodivergent, finding ways to speak to them, which means I also make a lot of boxes. That's this pile of stuff back here. They get Atrium in a box, and then we go through it. So that's a way we've worked to develop a way to take things to children who might not function really well inside the organized confines of community. But still they have deep community, really deep community.
Yes. Level 3 has so much reading. How can we adapt for dyslexic children?
This is highly controversial, I think. I've never spoken these words out loud. An iPad with the ability to read text, folks. It's there. Headphones, of course. Yes, will regular kids do it? Sure. But do we really care? But it is, I mean, giving a space for that to happen for those kids, absolutely. We recorded scripture reading and we made that available to our families so that if they were teaching the child something and that came up, they had the version of scripture that we were using. For us, it is, I'm in Protestant land. It's a free ride, you know, you just go anywhere. So we picked a particular Bible that is not as well known and easily accessed by the majority of our folks, but it works really well with the kids. And so that is what we recorded for them. So what's in their book. We also recorded it in Gullah Geechee, parts of it. And we have kids that are learning Gullah Geechee because it's very similar. It's close enough to English that they can kind of follow along. And so it's not like a whole new world. There's been discussion recently of should we do it in Spanish, because a lot of our kids take Spanish in school as well. And for the elementary kids, it's all about knowledge. So, but yes, iPads, headphones.
There's a couple questions, Elizabeth, that are asking for a recap of an earlier question. So I've kind of in our notes have put blog post possibly question mark so that things could be written out. So something that I don't want you to think that I haven't forgot about what you've written in the chat. But I'm going to move on to thinking about, is it a good idea to keep the social and emotional regulation aids and stay towards the back of the door so they're available to everyone in the atrium, children and adults, or is that too distracting for the atrium as a whole?
I'd leave it not in a highly central location, but I would leave it in a space where a child might not be able to express something. So let's go real fast for tantrum versus meltdown. A tantrum is the child in the checkout line that wants the candy bar. And as soon as they get the candy bar, they miraculously stop crying. That is a tantrum. A meltdown is you could give the kid might be asking for the candy bar. You might give them the candy bar and they still are melting down. They're still crying. The desire for the candy bar is what sent them over the edge emotionally, and any child can go there. So being able to kind of help them find a regulation space is good. And if they don't have the words, if their family isn't helping them find those words, sometimes it might be really helpful that we give them those words, because we have to live in community.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to pose one of the last questions. I did write everyone's questions down so I can take, as we and Elizabeth take their presentation and prepare for the recording and such to get sent out. I will try to have some conversations with Elizabeth to see if we can sort some answers for folks. But this question I thought was just really important and can kind of be our ending note for tonight, which is, do you recommend having Atrium with neurodivergent children only? And how many assistants would you suggest?
The kingdom of God does not divide us up. The kingdom of God contains all of us. You're in a space with me right now. So there may be times when it is the child is not in a space and the community is not in a space to be able to serve the needs of that child. That should be the rarest of rare cases, right? Because the kingdom isn't exclusive. The kingdom isn't just for the good kids and everybody else gets stuck in the other space. So it's our job to sort this out. That is my firm feeling on, should we have Spanish only? Should we have Portuguese only? Should we have places that are not joined together and unified, because the kingdom of God is many, many, many facets. Hey guys. Good morning. But also it's really helpful to set some parameters of what will and won't work inside your atrium with the resources and the staff that you have. If you have someone like Mandy who works in the world with children that have disabilities or differences, depending on how you want to define that term, then you may be in a very different space than Anna Russell, who doesn't have that background. So realizing that, and then if the child has a one-on-one aid within their school setting, I would probably say they may need a one-on-one aid unless you have a really good grip on how to help them inside an atrium setting. That's just maybe a standard to kind of think through and put into practice. And I will write something about this. You've given me so many things to write about. Thank you, because I don't think that way. So if you ask questions, I will answer them. It doesn't occur to me. So thanks. I appreciate the space for letting Kenya and I try this whole thing out.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Kenya. I hope you take this on the road, because it was really very, very, I took a lot of notes, and I'm going to have the recording and I'm going to have your blog, right?
Yeah, I will send Catherine a link to the Inclusive Atrium, and there I will, I'll put resources and a reading list and stuff like that up.
Yeah.
This is Autism Awareness Month. So,
Yes, it sure is.
well, tomorrow it begins. So follow an actually autistic person and see what their life experience is like, and see how that transforms you.
Kenya, you went from Black History to
Yeah.
Month
The
to
first
Autism
4
Month.
months of the year are some of my favorite. Like, so much celebration and history sharing. And thanks for letting a non-catechist be present in conversation with you all. You left such great questions. So
yeah, everyone, you can save the chat by pressing, if you have your chat open, there's 3 little dots on the right at the bottom. And if you press that, the first thing says save chat, and that will save it to your own computer if you want to just have links and things that were typed into the chat itself. I don't know how long it will take us. I know I'll have the recording ready in a couple of days, but I can't commit on Elizabeth's behalf.
Yeah, I'm working with a 50-year-old building that hasn't been functional for really 30 years. It's been a storage room for 30 years and turning it into an atrium right now. Right now we're dealing with lead and asbestos. So give me a little bit of grace right now.
Yeah. But if you want to send me the link to the slides, even having a chance to go through those slowly,
I can do that.
I have a list of everyone who registered, so I'll just send things out as you send it to me. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for your attention and for joining us. And a big,
thanks for your grace tonight.
This is how we clap on Zoom. So let's give Elizabeth and Kenya a big hand. Thank you so much.
God's peace, everyone.
Thank you. Peace to you.